Rebound is welcome, but there's work to do, was the headline for a recent article featuring our guest in one of our local newspapers. Today, we are about to take a journey through the economic heartbeat of the Bahamas. This is Economic Pulse, Resilience, Debt Dynamics, and Economic Growth. Keep watching. A brand new episode of You and Your Money starts now.
You and Your Money is brought to you by Central Bank of the Bahamas and Fidelity Bahamas.
Welcome to You and Your Money, everyone. Joining us today to talk about economic resilience and growth trajectory is the CEO of Fidelity Bank Bahamas, Mr. Gowon Bowe. Gowon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rhea. Always a pleasure to be here.
Now, Gowon, amid the economic rebound, what specific factors have played pivotal roles in revitalizing the Bahamas' economic landscape?
Well, if we look, we know that our number one industry is tourism. And we've seen very positive numbers, particularly in the number of tourist arrivals that we've seen to the shores. But I think more important than that, we've heard the hotels speaking about a greater rebound in terms of their room rates, in terms of their occupancy levels. And when we look at the numbers around tourist arrivals, we need to bifurcate them and have an understanding. The greatest of those numbers is actually the tourist arrivals coming through the cruise ports. And whilst we welcome that, ultimately those are our lowest spending tourists. So we know there's a tremendous opportunity given the volume. If we can start to extract greater value from those tourists, that we can actually expand the economy even further. But more important to our overall economic development is actually the stopover visitors. We know that stopover tourism is the far greater contributor to the economy. And so from that perspective, I think we see so many positive signs. Our financial services, unfortunately, continue to be I'm going to say lambasted by the international community. And so we have to start turning our attention to not be on the back foot, but be a bit more proactive. So as we go through the show today, really the message is, let's not look at this positive outlook as one that is a fait accompli, but rather the start of the journey. It's more important to say, well, if we have conducive environments, how are we exploiting them to maximize our return?
Now, Gowon, as we navigate a post-pandemic era, what challenges does the country face that could hinder a complete return to the pre-pandemic growth trajectory?
Short memory. It's probably the most realistic answer. That we know how difficult it was during the pandemic, and we know what the pandemic highlighted. Our failure to plan. Our failure to actually have reserves in store so that we were able to ride it through. Our overdependence on another person or another environment's contribution to our economic growth and development. And so if we forget what we learned during the pandemic, that's going to be the greatest threat to our true rebound. I don't want to give the illusion that we can drive all things because we are a part of a global economy, and so yes, we will have interdependencies, but there's a great difference between interdependency and dependency. And so if we understand how we are related and how we benefit from other environments, we can better take advantage of them and be ready to do so.
Now, you made mention, I want to ask, in terms of the National Development Plan, what are your thoughts about it? Are we effective with it?
You know, the short answer is no. You know, Ben Franklin, you know, there have been various iterations of his statement. He said, you know, failing to plan is planning to fail, is really a summary of what he said. But more importantly, a goal without a plan is just a wish. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. That ultimately we have a whole bunch of promises that come from our political leaders, but we don't see an actual strategy document, a plan that allows us to understand what are the short, medium, and long-term steps that we're going to be taking in order to achieve these goals, and lofty goals they are to achieve. So if we are not setting out what I'm going to call a roadmap, then how do we know that we're on the right journey? How do we know we're going in the right direction? We're going to have hurricanes. That's just a fact of life. We're probably going to have other health events like the global pandemic, hopefully not to the same extreme. We're going to have other natural events or existential events that are going to throw us off course, but we have to be better prepared to handle those so that we know that whilst we get thrown off course temporarily, we have a guiding light to bring us back to the actual path that we'd set out for ourselves.
Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the new hotel developments. They're often seen as indicators of economic vitality. How have recent additions contributed to the overall economic growth, and what potential do they hold for the future?
Well, you know, if we are to take stock in what the commentary has been from the Bahamas Hotel Tourism Association, we have an inventory problem, that we have demand that actually exceeds the supply of rooms. And we know that there has been a competing factor in the Airbnb, and I think, you know, notwithstanding the two industries see themselves as competitors, as a country we benefit by visitors and bringing persons to our shores. We have to look at that from a perspective, though, how does that translate into economic prosperity for the wider economy? And just using the National Development Plan and the State of the Nation, foreign direct investment, less than 20% of it actually stays in the shores of the Bahamas. So when we talk about these hotel developments and these resorts, etc., whilst it is wonderful news for us, we see the persons coming in, unfortunately they're largely driven by employee behavior and status. We need to be thinking more minded around how do we get economic ownership. And the truth of the matter is, whether it's Atlantis, Bahamas, or the major resorts, the Bahamian government is actually a major shareholder because of the concessions that are granted. And we need to start looking at it that way, that our concessions are investments in these projects, and we need to be seeing a return on the investment. And we need to measure that, and we need to articulate that. Airbnb has provided another avenue for Bahamian ownership, so those who are in the industry and taking greater advantage of the tourists that are there. Airbnb has allowed the food stores and the convenience stores and the car rental business and others to thrive because persons have again gone back into the community. And the only thing we have to be very careful of is we don't have this crime spilling into an area that is actually going to disrupt that type of positive growth.
Now, you know, with employment being increased, the workforce has seen a decrease since 2019. What nuances should we consider in understanding this employment dynamic and its impact on the broader economic scenario?
Well, I think we need to be honest and candid around the numbers. I know that the government has, you know, effectively bragged about the unemployment rate being lower. But when we look at the actual numerator and denominator, I go back to basic mathematics. If my numerator is smaller, but my denominator is even smaller, then my actual, the overall ratio looks better. But we need to be looking at the fundamentals. So why is it that our workforce is contracting? We know that we have a slightly aging population, but I don't remember reading that many deaths in the past few years to say that, you know, persons have died out of the workforce. So we need to start focusing our attention on incentivizing persons to be in the workforce. And sometimes that is what I'm going to say, matching employment with ownership opportunities. That is an opportunity to say with businesses, how do we incentivize businesses to say, make your employees shareholders, not major shareholders, but I could tell you that it's a very different outlook from an individual who owns a part of the company and one who just works for it. We have to take our mindset not from pure employment and employee status, but having some ownership and being an active participant in our economic outlook.
Now, in pursuit of the economic resilience, what strategies should be prioritized to leverage the buoyancy in the economy, ensuring sustainable growth beyond immediate rebounds?
Well, I think the first thing is we have to stop looking at things with a short-term focus.
Okay.
You know, ultimately, as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. And we use that saying to really say that it takes time. If we look at the Bahamian economy and where we are today, the truth of the matter is some of the, I'm going to say, deficiencies we have in our system have accumulated over decades. So it's not going to be in any single year that they're going to be actually reversed and, you know, back on the right trajectory. So we need to stop giving the false impression to our society that all will be well if you trust me for another year or you trust me for another political cycle. The truth of the matter is it's going to take a generation to get us back to where we want to be. So we need an element like the National Development Plan that has the 4 pillars. It has the economic pillar that everyone hears me, or they believe I only speak about, but it has the social pillar, which is education, which is crime, which is healthcare. It has the environment, which is whether it be our natural resources or our built environment and infrastructure. But one of the key pillars is governance, and is really talking about not just hanging around long enough to be in senior positions, but having our promotion and our advancement in our public sector be based on merit, having a system that is holding persons accountable for achieving the objectives that have been set out, for setting out the strategies and plans. So if we are truly to advance as an economy, we have to start thinking about how do we leave for the next generation. And I know I have been a great fortunate individual to sit at the feet of many of the older generations, and that was their whole focus. They actually didn't look at themselves. They looked at how were they going to leave for their children and grandchildren. And if I'm very candid, our generation or my generation has not done the same, and actually we should be condemned for that.
Wow, condemn is a really big word.
Yep.
It's a strong word for that. But definitely we take note and we look at the ways or the opportunities that we have so that we can make an impact on the generation behind us. Mr. Bowe, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to look at debt dynamics and fiscal responsibility. This is You and Your Money. We'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Amanda Ferguson with 𝗪𝗧𝗡𝗃𝗃 Candle Company. We sell candles, we sell bath bombs, and this is our 10th year in business. We're actually a Sand Dollar newbie. We signed up for Sand Dollar for the Jollification Festival. The experience has been seamless. At first, I mean, new stuff, right? We don't know what to expect. With Sand Dollar, we were very pleased to know that we were offered another way for customers to make payments that were digital. And this here is very important to us because we don't like handling cash, the physical cash anymore. It's safer that way to be able to just have that on a digital platform. At the end of the day, I have my totals, I know what I've made, I don't have to count the cash, I don't have to worry about the security of walking to my car with cash on me. I can tell you that, I won't go back to the old way for sure. I'd much rather the transactions being on my phone. It's simple, it's instantaneous, and my customers have actually really loved it too.
I used to think of the bank as my personal ATM machine. If I wanted a new car, new furniture, a weekend trip to Miami, no problem, just max out the credit card or top up my loan. I was a big baller until I realized that 75% of my salary was going to pay back all those loans. Fidelity's personal financial coaching was the best solution. Fidelity gave me a plan with a debt consolidation loan that has a built-in savings that pays 5% interest. I now only have one low monthly payment plus money in my pocket. Give Fidelity Bank a call at 356-7764 in Nassau or 352-6676 in Freeport. Visit any of Fidelity's locations or visit a website at fidelitygroup.com.
Welcome back to You and Your Money. Still with us is the CEO of Fidelity Bank Bahamas, Mr. Gowon Bowe, and we're continuing our discussion on economic pulse, resilience, debt dynamics, and economic growth. In this segment, I want us to focus on debt dynamics and fiscal responsibility. Now, Gowon, the debt to GDP ratio has shown improvement, but how does this metric contribute to understanding the country's fiscal health, and what implications does it carry for future economic endeavors?
Well, I start by what we spoke about with the unemployment statistic. The debt to GDP is actually improving, and we need to understand the numerator and denominator. The numerator is the debt. That number is actually not improving. We're continuing to grow our debt. The denominator is GDP. So as GDP grows, that's a positive sign for economic growth. But when we depend solely on the denominator as being the buoyancy in our debt to GDP, we have a problem, because it means we haven't yet understood the mindset that we have to pay back what we've borrowed. So what we need to be focusing our attention on, which the government has articulated in more recent times, is getting ourselves to a fiscal balance and then surplus to allow us to start to bring that numerator down. The problem I have with the statistic and depending on the GDP, What happens when we have a hurricane and we have contraction in GDP? What happens when we have something like the global pandemic and we have a contraction in GDP? Let us not give a false impression that our debt situation is improving simply because the economy is growing. We need to be focused on both numbers so that in the event that we have contraction in GDP, we've already reduced the number sufficiently that we have headroom and buoyancy, that it doesn't move, what I'm going to say, ebb and flow with what can happen with circumstances that are beyond our control. Let us control what we can, which is the level of debt that we take on.
Now, Gowon, how does the current status of the national debt impact the country's financial stability and ability to meet its financial obligations?
Well, you know, if I bring the example back to our household, we have to be very careful when we are borrowing to pay our normal expenses as opposed to borrowing for long-term benefit. For many years now, we've been borrowing to meet payroll, which is the equivalent of borrowing to go on vacation and borrowing to buy Christmas gifts. That the reality is there's no future economic benefit from that level of borrowing or that type of borrowing. So what we have to understand is in our fiscal affairs, we hear persons and sometimes policymakers that refer to, oh, well, fiscal deficits is not a bad thing and it's often been used. The answer is yes, and in larger territories like the United States where they have a huge demand for their economy, then they have the ability to do that. In a small environment like the Bahamas, we have to be practical and realistic. We are going to have to pay back what it is that we've borrowed. So to be honest, I'm not opposed to government borrowing, but their borrowing should be for long-term benefit. So for the infrastructure that we put in, our roads, our infrastructure to allow for progress and development, we should be borrowing to invest in how we extract benefit from the economy. So whether that's in our natural environment or our built environment, we should be matching things like, okay, the bridge, for example. We borrowed money to build a bridge from New Providence into Paradise Island, but what do we also have attached to that? An actual toll. So we are paying the piper through the actual asset that we have created and borrowed to do so. The Nassau Airport Development Company, we borrowed to build an infrastructure that allows the gateway for our tourists to come in. So those types of borrowing are certainly welcome and should be encouraged. When we are running fiscal deficits on the current side, meaning that our current revenues are not enough to carry out or pay for our current expenses, we need to have a hard look. And again, I go back to the household. We know that if we are earning a nickel and spending a dime, that we are going to run into significant problems, and it's no different for a country. So policymakers should not give the false impression that governments can run fiscal deficits indefinitely and there's no consequence. There is a real consequence, because at some point in time, those persons who've lent us will come knocking at the door and want to be repaid. And if we don't have the resources in order to do so, whilst, yes, the country will continue, it will continue under whose direction and under whose rule.
Listen, that's definitely much food for thought. As the country aims for economic resilience, what strategies can be implemented to sustain improvements in the debt to GDP ratio and the overall GDP growth, ensuring long-term fiscal responsibility? You
know, it's, as they say, cut your suit to fit the cloth, right? That ultimately, I think we have our budget exercise backwards. We start by saying, well, okay, we know what expenditure we must expend, and then how do we get the revenues to cover it? And I think we need to start with the harsh reality of saying, well, if this is our revenue levels that we can achieve without causing disruption in the economy, and we could come briefly back to that, then we need to align our expenses based on the revenues we have coming in. Businesses have to live by that. Families have to live by that, individuals have to live by that, and government should be no different. So ultimately, we know that our tax system is one that needs, I'm going to say, reform. That's a separate issue altogether, but we need to start by saying that we can only spend what it is that we have. I think there's a belief by certainly a large part of the citizenry, which is fed by the politicians, that government is with endless resources. And we need to start bringing that reality home now that we have finite resources and we need to deploy them in the most productive way. So we may not be able to provide all things to all persons. But you know what? Our intention is to provide those things that teach a man to fish as opposed to give him fish, because if we allow our citizenry to become financially and economically independent, then government is actually only responsible for providing those services that are needed for the common person.
I don't know how many people really prepared to actually go into the mode of teaching people how to fish.
You know, that's the sad part. I will tell you that one of the most disappointing statements I hear oftentimes is that I don't know if the average man or the man on the street is ready or appreciates that. And I think that sometimes we sell our citizens short, that actually they are not ready for it because we've not, as leaders in the country, taken the hard stance to educate them. I can tell you, when I go out into the highways and byways, as they say, and I speak about income tax, yeah, they're ready to pelt me with rocks when I first start, but by the time I finish the conversation, invariably it's, can you tell me more? Can I understand better? And you know what they say is, it's just a trust factor. They say, well, Gowon, if you were there, I would trust you to do it, but I ain't sure I trust the ones that are there. And so that's something that our politicians need to take in mind.
Well, Mr. Bowe, on that, we have to take another break. When we get back, we're going to talk about strategies for sustainable revenue. This is You and Your Money. We'll be right back.
Wouldn't it be satisfying to own your own piece of paradise? The most important investment you can make in your life is real estate, and Fidelity has the solution for you. You could become the owner of a home or a lot on any of our beautiful islands. Come and talk to a loan officer and inquire about how you can fund your goals with a loan today. Because we know it means a lot to own a lot. Visit us online at fidelitygroup.com. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or visit any of our branches, or phone 356-7764 in Nassau, or 352-6676 for Freeport. Fidelity, we're good for you.
Join us for the Bahamas Business Outlook Conference, Thursday, January 25th, 8:45 a.m. at the Bahamar Convention Center. We're bringing the business community together under the theme, Future Bahamas, branding the national identity and planning for success. The day includes a business expo, lunch, an art tour, keynote address by Prime Minister Davis, exciting panels, and so much more. Begin your year on a high note. Get your tickets today at tclevents.com.
Welcome back to You and Your Money. Mr. Bowe is still with us. Now, Gowon, in the previous segments, we spoke about economic resilience and growth trajectory and debt dynamics and fiscal responsibility. In this segment, I want us to talk about strategies for sustainable revenue. Now, how can the country turn economic vibrancy into sustained revenue, promoting savings and financial independence?
I would say it starts with render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And that means making sure that our tax system is one that equitably extracts taxation from the common environment. We've long had a consumption-based system, which is unduly burdensome to those who are less fortunate among us. And we need to focus our attention on more equitable distribution of that tax burden. The reality is, when we look at our GDP per capita, it is very distortive because it is very high and is one of the highest in the Western Hemisphere, certainly amongst the Caribbean. And it's because we have great wealth in the country, but it is concentrated in a select few. And so those select few need to pay more of the tax burden. And we need to understand that it is not about crippling or what I'm going to say disincentivizing capital development and expansion and growth. It is more about saying render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. We equally have a responsibility to teach persons that we actually go to work to earn money, yes, but we earn money to save. And the reason we want to save is because we want our reserves to allow us to invest. And the reason we want to invest is to build wealth. You know, it's one thing when you have to go to work to get a paycheck. It's another when you own shares or ownership in an enterprise and you're sleeping and that enterprise is still making you money as an owner. We have this concept that I'm only an owner if I have 51%. But the reality is I could be 0.001%. And if that is $1 billion profit company, I'm still making a nice return. So we have to change the mindset into saying that ownership is not about majority ownership and control. Ownership is about having an equity stake in the actual financial future of the country. And we have to have the government with the mindset that is promoting that. How do we promote ownership? So we spoke earlier segments around some of the major resorts, and I mentioned the concessions. Well, the reality is government is in a great position to say, well, we see all of these projects coming in. How do we encourage investors to partner with local Bahamian equity ownership? How do we say, and it may not always be to the individual who only has $500, but how do we put together the investment vehicles that the smaller person can put money into to allow them to participate in the bigger ventures? How do we bring the capital that is within this country? The banks have in excess of $2 billion in excess liquidity. And that is only an indication that persons are literally putting their money under the mattress, but putting it into the banks. They're not investing it because their confidence has not yet returned to the economic rebound. And so government has to appreciate that they are responsible for that over many decades. Persons are not yet ready to trust that there is an economic future. We see these bright spots, but we always wonder, is that just a mirage, and is that going to fall away? If we have a national development plan that shows that this is where we're going over the next 25 years, and this is the steps that we're taking, and these are the milestones that we should be achieving in year 2, 3, 5, 7, 10, then persons will actually start to build confidence both domestically and internationally. Right. That yes, we have a strategic plan and we're hitting our targets. And it doesn't mean hitting every target. But if we have those targets and milestones, when we fail to meet them, we can readjust and we can assess why we missed them. And it may simply be a matter of timing, or it may mean realignment. But we have to start with the plan.
Now, Gowon, I want you to lay out an argument that gives the country comfort that we are in a good place.
You know, I start by simply saying, look at those who have an interest to come into the country, both as visitors and investors. We should not shy away from the fact that we have no shortage of interested parties, whether that is persons looking to buy properties, whether that is persons looking to invest in the economy, or persons coming to visit the environment that we have. So we as Bahamians have to sometimes take a pause and appreciate what it is that we have. But in appreciating what it is that we have to also become active participants in how we nurture that and how that is for our benefit. We often sit back and hope that there's going to be manna from heaven. But the truth of the matter is, prayer without works is dead. And so ultimately, we have to be focused and focus our attention on saying, well, how is it that we take these natural gifts that we've been given and we turn them into economic opportunities for the wider population? And you know what? It is not around centering all of that in government. It is around devolving that into the society, but more importantly, in a system and a manner that is understood, laid out, and is equitable to all participants, meaning that everyone has a fair shot once they're willing to put their shoulder to the wheel.
You just said equitable for all. Are you saying that we are in a space where the majority is actually ruling?
No. Right now we are sitting that, you know, our forefathers fought for that. And they had the right principles, and they started initiatives, whether it be Bahamas Mortgage Corporation, the central bank, the National Insurance Board, for more equitable distribution. But I think that ultimately we had the Moseses, as they say, that brought us out of Egypt, and we're looking for the Joshuas that will carry us into the promised land. And that promised land is not about gifting. That is about saying, how do we teach a man to fish as opposed to giving him a fish? And I keep repeating that. But more importantly, I would say that when we look at wealth in our country, it is concentrated in the select few. And it is not around being Robin Hood and taking from the rich to give to the poor. It's more about how do we elevate those that are less fortunate by giving them education, giving them equal opportunity to participate. And if they're willing to lay out and sacrifice, I'm going to say short-term gain for long-term advantage, then they will certainly be rewarded, because I think we have enough examples in our society that shows persons who work hard succeed, even those who did not come from the privileged class.
Well, Mr. Bowe, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Always a pleasure.
Being a part of shaping a resilient and prosperous future for the Bahamas is a choice that each of us can make to be a part of the solution. Remember that understanding resilience, debt dynamics, and economic growth is just the first step. Stay engaged, stay informed, and let's work together for a thriving economy. Thank you for being a key player in this crucial conversation. Until next time, be the change that you want to see.
You and Your Money was brought to you by Central Bank of the Bahamas and Fidelity Bahamas.